Chapter 22. The Quiet Between Wars. Time skip Gilbert home. Alisa woke up first, and she sees Steve peacefully, and she smiles to herself before kissing his cheek and quietly gets up and gets dressed before grabbing a plain piece of paper and writes, "I'll be back soon. Love you, heart suit." She puts it on the nightstand next to her old bed where Steve could see it, but she pauses for a moment. Looking at him again, then she smiles to herself, and she heads quietly slipped out of the room. Time skip outside the Gilbert house. Alisa steps out onto the porch, and she sits down on the swings before grabbing her phone and scrolls for a moment before stopping on a contact. She calls Stefan, and it rang twice before Stefan answers. Alisa. Morning, Stefan. You're calling early. Everything okay? Alisa looks inside as Alina making her and Jeremy some food. Yeah, everything's fine. I just need a favor. Stefan sounded curious. Okay, what kind of favor? Alisa hesitated for a moment before speaking. Do you still have that photo? What photo? You know exactly which one. There was a pause on the line before she hears sighing on the phone. The one with Steve. Alisa nodded even though he couldn't see her. Yeah, that one. That was taken in the 40s, Stefan said quietly. Why do you want it? Alisa thinks for a moment before replying. Because I want a new wallpaper on my phone, and I thought that a picture of him before Captain America would be better suited. Stefan pauses for a moment as he thinks before telling her to stay on the line as he walks to his room and walks over to his diary. He grabs the picture of him and Steve, and he took a picture and sends it to her. The image appeared and Alisa checks the message, and she sees the image of young Steve, smaller but determined. Still the same person. A soft smile appeared on her face. Thanks, Stefan. You're welcome, he replied quietly, and then he asked something carefully. Does he remember? Alisa looked toward the house, upstairs where Steve still slept. No. No, she said softly. Stefan understood immediately. Good. Yeah, she agreed quietly. They ended the call. Alisa stared at the photo again, and then she set it as her wallpaper. Time skip Gilbert house, later. The smell of pancakes filled the house. Alina was flipping them at the stove when Steve walked downstairs. He had changed into a simple gray shirt and jeans. Alina turned. Then she blinked. Oh wow. Steve stopped halfway down the stairs. Morning. Alina pointed a spatula at him. You're Captain America, and you're just casually walking into my kitchen. Steve smiled politely. That happens more often than you'd think. Jeremy walked in, still half asleep. Then he saw Steve. He immediately woke up. Okay, that's still weird. Steve chuckled slightly. Alisa walked in through the front door at that moment. Alina turned. You disappeared. Morning run, Alisa said casually. Steve raised an eyebrow slightly. Run. Alisa shrugged. Salvet or house? Steve smiled faintly. Time skip Mystic Falls, day 3. Steve was sitting outside the grill with Stefan. They were playing chess. Damon leaned against the railing nearby, drinking bourbon. So let me get this straight, Damon said. You fought Nazis. Steve moved a chess piece calmly. Yes. You punched a guy named Red Skull. Yes. And you carry a frisbee that can knock down tanks. Steve looked up. It's a shield. Damon smirked. Same difference. Stefan quietly moved his knight. Check. Steve smiled slightly. Time skip Mystic Falls Woods, day 5. Tyler Lockwood stared at Steve. You're actually Captain America. Steve nodded. Tyler folded his arms. Cool. Then he transformed into a werewolf mid-shift. Steve didn't even flinch. Alisa laughed. See, told you he handles weird well. Time skip Gilbert house, day 8. Bonnie studied Steve carefully. You have something strange about your energy. Steve raised an eyebrow. Good strange. Bonnie nodded. Ancient magic doesn't like you. Steve blinked. That sounds bad. Bonnie smiled slightly. It just means you're not supposed to exist. Alisa groaned. Great. Time skip Mystic Grill, day 12. Caroline had her notebook again. Okay, new question. Steve sighed good-naturedly. All right, if a vampire bit Captain America. Alisa immediately covered her face. Steve leaned back. That's actually a fascinating hypothetical. Damon laughed loudly. Time skip Gilbert porch. The porch swing creaked softly in the quiet night air. Mystic Falls had settled into its usual calm, crickets chirping, wind rustling through the trees, the occasional distant car driving through town. Steve sat on the porch steps with his elbows resting on his knees. For the first time in weeks, things had been peaceful. No missions. No emergencies. Just quiet. Inside the house, he could hear faint laughter from Alina and Jeremy arguing about something in the kitchen, while Damon made sarcastic comments from the living room. Steve smiled faintly to himself. His phone buzzed in his hand. The screen lit up. Natasha Romanoff. A message appeared. Fury wants you back in DC. Steve stared at the message for a moment. Then he leaned back slightly inside. The screen dimmed again. The porch door creaked open behind him. Alisa stepped outside, and she wrapped her arms around herself slightly as the cool night air hit her. She noticed Steve immediately and the expression on his face. Work? She asked softly. Steve held up the phone slightly. Shield. Alisa walked over and leaned against the railing beside him. Fury. Steve nodded. Natasha. Alisa rubbed the back of her neck. Well, that was inevitable. Steve chuckled quietly. Yeah. There was a moment of silence between them. The porch light cast a warm glow across the wooden steps. Finally, Alisa spoke again. You know, we were already talking about leaving Mystic Falls and Portland for a bit. Steve looked up at her. She shrugged lightly. A vacation. He raised an eyebrow. Vacation. Yeah, she said casually. You know, normal people things. Steve laughed softly. I don't think either of us qualifies as normal. Fair, she admitted. She leaned against the railing more comfortably. But we did say we wanted to go somewhere for a while. Steve nodded slowly. Washington. Alisa pointed at him. Exactly. She tilted her head. You wanted to see the Smithsonian. Steve smirked faintly. It's gonna be weird seeing my face in museums. Alisa laughed quietly. And I wanted to see the monuments. She gestured toward him dramatically. With the world's most historically accurate tour guide. Steve stood up and walked over to her. So you're suggesting we turn Fury's message into a holiday? Alisa shrugged again. Technically, we were already planning it. Steve considered it. Then he looked down at his phone again. Natasha's message was still sitting there. He typed a reply. We're coming to DC. The response came almost immediately. Good, Fury will be happy. Then another message appeared. And bring Alisa. I want to meet the woman who survived Damon Salvetter. Steve laughed quietly. Alisa raised an eyebrow. What? Steve showed her the phone. She rolled her eyes. Oh great, your spy friends already know about Damon. Steve slid his phone back into his pocket. So, DC. Alisa smiled. DC. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Neither of them paid much attention to it. Chapter 23, The Road to Washington. Time skipped back on the road, a week later. After meeting and talking to Alisa's family, Steve and Alisa finally decided it was time to head to Washington. Mystic Falls had been quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that only small towns had before everyone woke up. Alisa locked the front door of the Gilbert house before turning keys in hand. Steve was leaning casually against the passenger side of her car with his arms crossed, watching her with an amused look on his face. You know, Steve said lightly, I feel like I just passed the most intense interrogation of my life. Alisa laughed as she walked over to him. Please, my family actually went easy on you. Steve raised an eyebrow. Easy. She shrugged. Jeremy didn't threaten you. That's basically approval. Steve chuckled as she tossed him the car keys. He caught them easily. Oh no, he said immediately. You're driving. Alisa blinked. What? Steve opened the passenger door and gestured dramatically. You've seen what happens when I drive modern cars. She crossed her arms, fighting a smile. You drove a motorcycle. That's different. How? It goes forward. Alisa snorted and shook her head before sliding into the driver's seat. Steve climbed into the passenger side. As the car pulled away from the curb, Mystic Falls slowly disappeared behind them. For a while, neither of them spoke. The road stretched out ahead of them, sunlight flickering through the trees as they drove out of town. Steve glanced out the window before looking back at her. You sure you're ready for this? He asked quietly. Alisa kept her eyes on the road. Washington, she said, everything. She thought for a moment before answering. I fought vampires, witches, and Klaus Mikkelsen. Steve blinked. Okay, fair point. She smirked. Time skipped somewhere in Virginia, later that evening. The sky had turned orange by the time they crossed into Virginia. Steve had his feet propped lightly on the dashboard while he watched the scenery pass. Alisa glanced over at him. You look suspiciously relaxed. Steve shrugged. Long drives don't bother me. Of course they don't, she said. You grew up before road trips were invented. Steve gave her a look. You're enjoying that joke way too much. Absolutely. A few minutes later, lights from a city began appearing in the distance. Steve leaned forward slightly. That it? Alisa nodded. Washington. Even from miles away, the skyline was recognizable. Monuments. Government buildings. History. Steve leaned back in his seat again, quieter now. This city held a lot of memories. Some good. Some complicated. Alisa noticed the shift. Without looking at him, she reached over and squeezed his hand for a moment. You don't have to face it alone. Steve looked at her and smiled softly. I know. Time skip Washington, D.C., later that night. By the time they reached the city, traffic had thinned and the streets were glowing with warm streetlights. Alisa pulled the car into the parking lot of a small hotel a few blocks away from the National Mall. Steve looked at the building. Not exactly Stark Tower. Alisa grabbed her bag. Tony isn't here to pay for 5-star hotels. Steve nodded thoughtfully. Good point. They checked in quickly and headed upstairs. The room was simple 2 beds, a small table, and a window overlooking the city lights. Alisa tossed her bag onto one of the beds before walking over to the window. Washington, D.C. stretched out before them. The Washington Monument stood tall in the distance. Steve stepped beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Alisa glanced sideways at him. So, she said casually. Steve raised an eyebrow. So. Tomorrow, she said. Steve nodded. Tomorrow. There was a small pause. Then Alisa turned toward him with a teasing smile. You plan on going for one of those famous early morning runs? Steve smirked slightly. Maybe. Try not to lap anyone too many times. Steve chuckled. No promises. Outside, the city remained calm and quiet. But by morning, everything was about to start. Chapter 24, on your left. Time skip, the next morning. Sam is jogging at a steady pace. Beside him, Alisa is keeping up, even though her breathing is heavier. Sam glances at her. You're doing good, officer. Most people give up by the reflecting pool. Alisa huffs as she continues to run. I've chased suspects through Portland alleyways, Sam. If I can handle a Wesson on a caffeine high, I can handle a morning jog in D.C. Suddenly, Steve streaks past them, accidentally causing the wind to knock Alisa sideways. Steve speaks up as he ran past. On your left. Alisa, who just stumbled, shouted at him. Steve, seriously, you're going to give me whiplash. They continue to run. but Steve ran past them again. On your left. Sam nods as he continues to run. On my left, got it. Alisa rolls her eyes slightly and yells at Steve again. If you knock over a tourist, I'm not filing the paperwork. Sam and Alisa continue to run beside each other, and for the third time, Steve ran past them again. Sam yells behind him, "Don't say it, don't you say it." Steve ran past them as he says, "On your left." Sam yells, "Come on." He starts to run faster to catch up, but Alisa slowed down. Knowing better, and she walks over to Sam as he stops to rest under a tree, and she walks over, her grim senses already cataloging the area before she settles her hands on her hips. Steve walks over to Sam with his hand on his hip. "Need a medic?" Sam laughs. "I need a new set of lungs. Dude, you just ran like 13 miles in 30 minutes. Alisa wipes sweat from her forehead as she tells Sam, "I told him he needs to stop treating every morning like a battlefield. He eats toast like it personally insulted his honor, and he runs like the ground is on fire." Steve looks at them with a little smile. "I guess I got a late start." Sam looks at him as he chuckles. "Really? You should be ashamed of yourself. You should take another lap." Sam looks away for a moment before back at Steve. "Did you just take it? I assume you just took it." Steve points to him. "What unit you with?" Sam looks at him. 58th Pararescue, but now I'm working down at the VA. He raises his hand to shake Steve's hand. "Sam Wilson." Steve took it and helped him up. "Steve Rogers." Sam looks at Steve. "I kind of put that together." He looks at Alisa. "And I'm guessing you're the one keeping the legend from having a full-on identity crisis in traffic." Alisa smirked. "I'm the one who makes sure he drinks coffee instead of whatever was in tins back in his day. I'm Alisa." She takes Sam's hand and shook it. Sam smiles at her before looking over to Steve. "Must have freaked you out, coming home after the whole defrosting thing." Steve sighs. "It takes some getting used to. It's good to meet you, Sam." Steve turns to walk off as his arm moves to hold Alisa and pulling her with him, but Sam stops them as he speaks up. "It's your bed, right?" Steve stops and turns to face him. "What's that?" Sam speaks up again. "Your bed, it's too soft. When I was over there, I'd sleep on the ground, use rock for pillows like a caveman. Now I'm home, lying in my bed, and it's like..." Steve finishes the sentence. "Lying on a marshmallow, feel like I'm gonna sink right to the floor." Alisa nods towards Steve. "He still tries to sleep on the floor sometimes. I have to remind him it's 2014, not a trench in Belgium." Steve looks at her, then back at Sam. "How long?" Sam shrugs his shoulders. "Two tour, you must miss the good old days, huh?" Steve thinks for a moment before looking at him again. "Well, things aren't so bad. Food's a lot better. We used to boil everything. No polio is good. Internet so helpful." Alisa mutters under her breath. "For some cases." Steve looks at her as he knows what she's muttering about before looking back at Sam, without giving anything away about her. "I've been reading that a lot, trying to catch up." Sam thought about something, then suggests, "Marvin Gaye, 1973, Trouble Man soundtrack. Everything you missed jammed into one album." Alisa raised an eyebrow. Finally, someone with better taste than the I Love Lucy reruns he keeps finding. Sam tries not to laugh as Steve pulls out his notebook as he tells Sam, "I'll put it on the list." The cell phone starts to ring and Steve grabs his phone and checks the messages. "Mission alert. Extraction imminent. Meet at the curb." Alisa looks over to him as Steve speaks up. "All right, Sam, duty calls. Thanks for the run, if that's what you want to call running." Alisa raised an eyebrow at him before Sam chuckles as he speaks. "Oh, that's how it is." Steve shrugs his shoulder. "Oh, that's how it is." Sam laughs. "Okay." Alisa leaned in toward Sam as she whispers, "Don't worry, Sam. I'll roast him for it later. It's my gift." Sam smiles, then tells both of them, "Anytime you want to stop by the VA, make me look awesome in front of the girl at the front desk. Just let me know." Steve smiles. "I'll keep it in mind." Alisa notices a black Corvette pulls up to the curb. The window rolls down, revealing Natasha. Alisa's posture stiffens instantly. Her Grimm senses don't just prickle, they scream. Natasha's energy is cold, sharp, and buried under 1,000 layers of performance. Natasha does a little smirk. "Hey, fellas, either one of you know where the Smithsonian is? I'm here to pick up a fossil." Alice's lip twitch slightly as both her and Steve walk over to the car, as Steve tells Natasha. "That's hilarious." Natasha meets her eyes, a faint, dangerous smirk playing on her lips. "So, you're the one. Fury says you survived a salvator. I expected more. Armor." Alisa shrugs. "And I expected someone who didn't use a GPS to find a museum. Welcome to the 21st century. We have Google Maps now." Natasha does a little smirk again. "I like her, Steve. Get in." Sam and Natasha introduces themselves to each other as Steve opens the door for Alisa. She slides into the back seat, her eyes never leaving the back of Natasha's head. Sam watches as the car quickly pulls away.